welcome to my channel. I am Alketa. In this video I am going to show you how to sew the Bow Bustier. You can download the PDF sewing pattern from the link in the description. Materials you will need for this project are a medium weight fabric as you prefer. You will need a lightweight lining. I'm using a lightweight satin, fusible interlining, a ridgeland boning. I'm using 1 cm with boning, grommets and the tools to put them, a satin cord for the lacing. Make sure to cut all the pieces following the instructions on the PDF pattern. Then you must press the fusible interlining to the main fabric. Make sure to add an extra strip of 4 to 5 centimeters on the center back on both sides to reinforce the fabric for the grommets. Pin the two side front pieces to the center piece, making sure to match the notch on the bust and sew 1 cm seam allowance. Now insert the two back pieces one by one and sew in 1 cm seam allowance. Follow the same steps for the lining. After sewing all the pieces together, open and press the seams. Use a round form to press the bust area to give it the round shape. Follow the same steps for the lining. Now it's time to cut and prepare the bones, making sure to cut them 2 cm shorter to leave space for the seam allowances. Burn the edges with a lighter. Now it's time to sew the bones. I prefer to put the bones on the seam allowances so it doesn't show any seam on the outside of the bustier. So I insert half of the bone in one seam and sew it with straight stitch. Now sew the other side of the bone on the other seam allowance. As you see, there is no seam on the outside of the bustier. I insert the bones on the front using the same technique. Since the seams on the bust are curvier, make sure to sew carefully. If you don't want to do like this, and for you it's not a problem to show the seams on the outside, then you just can sew the bones flat over the bustier. Now insert the center back bones. Since I'm using 6 millimeters grommets, I put the bone 2.5 centimeters away from the center back. So in this way I leave space for the seam allowance and for the grommets. If you have wider grommets, then you must put the bone in a bigger distance from the center back and sew with a straight stitch. It's time to put together the main fabric with the lining, putting them right face to right face and pinning all over the top of the bustier, and sew with 1 centimeter seam allowance. Open the bustier and make a 3 millimeter seam over the lining to prevent the lining from showing on the outside while wearing the bustier. Now put again right face to right face the lining with the main fabric and sew on both sides of the center back with 1 centimeter seam allowance. Turn over the bustier and press flat the seams all over. Now press the bones to straighten them. While pressing the bust area, use a round form to give the bones a round shape. Now close the bustier on the bottom by sewing a 5 millimeter seam allowance in order to fix the fabric together, so it's easier to sew the bias later. On the center back, make a 3 millimeter seam on both sides. Measure the waist on the bustier and cut a piece of main fabric 2 centimeters longer than the waist and 5 centimeters wider. I didn't put a PDF piece for this since it's easier to cut a strip of fabric and so you don't waste paper. So put the fabric right face to right face with the bustier on the bottom and sew in 1 centimeter seam allowance, leaving 1 centimeter of fabric on both sides of the center back. Then turn over the fabric on the inside of the bustier and pin it as shown on the video. Pin the edges to close them well and sew with straight stitch. Now mark where will be placed the grommets. I'm putting them in 4 cm distance from one another. Make the holes and then put the grommets as shown on the video. If you have the presser tool for grommets, it will be much easier for you. I still haven't invested on one yet, so I use these little tools for them. So let's make the bow. Fold the fabric right face to right face and sew in other 3 sides with 1 cm seam allowance, leaving a 7 cm opening to turn over the fabric. Turn over the fabric and close the hole, sewing by hand with invisible stitch. Find the middle of the longer side and pleat the piece in the middle and stitch it by hand. Now prepare the centerpiece by folding it and sew, and then turn the seam on the center and sew on both sides. Put it on the center of the bow and sew it by hand. Now the bow is ready to be attached to the bustier. Insert the bow on the top of the center front, stitching by hand. Now the bustier is done. It should look like this. Thank you for watching and hope it was helpful. Don't forget to subscribe for more tutorials and PDF patterns. Bye!